Jason wiped his calloused hands on his faded blue overalls, the fabric worn thin from years of use. The auto shop had been his life for 15 years, ever since he dropped out of engineering school to care for his ailing mother. Though she was gone now, he'd never returned to his studies, finding purpose instead in fixing what others couldn't, or wouldn't, repair in the small town where most folks live paycheck to paycheck. As he closed the hood on Mrs. Wilson's ancient Buick, he spotted movement outside. A small boy in a wheelchair, struggling near the curb. The chair's front wheel was bent at an unnatural angle, and tears streamed down the child's face as he gripped the useless armrests. His mother stood beside him, her expression a mixture of helplessness and exhaustion, checking her phone as if searching for solutions that weren't there. Without hesitation, Jason stepped outside, wiping grease from his hands. Something about the scene struck a chord deep within him, perhaps because he knew what it meant to lose mobility, to be stuck in place when you desperately needed to move forward. "Hey, buddy," Jason called, kneeling to meet the boy's eye level. "Looks like you ran into some trouble there." The child looked up, his eyes wide with uncertainty and a flicker of hope. "It broke," he said softly. "I was just trying to go down the sidewalk, and it just—" He sniffed, glancing at his mother as if unsure whether to continue. Jason turned to the woman. "Let me take a look at it." No charge. He could see the worn edges of her coat, the careful mending on her son's jacket, familiar signs of stretching every dollar. "Are you sure?" "I don't have," she began, her voice tight with the pride of someone who hated asking for help. Jason held up a hand. "I insist. I'm Jason, by the way." "Olivia," she replied. "And this is Ben." Carefully lifting the wheelchair, Jason rolled it into his garage, positioning it under the brightest work light. The damage was worse than he'd initially thought. The front wheel assembly was completely bent, the frame had shifted out of alignment, and the right brake barely engaged. This wasn't a quick fix. It would require parts, labor, and time. All things Jason's struggling business could ill afford to spare. The stack of unpaid bills in his office drawer flashed through his mind. The rent was due next week, and parts suppliers were already calling about overdue invoices. But as he glanced at Ben, now perched on a shop stool watching with wide-eyed fascination as Jason examined the chair, none of that seemed to matter. "Can you fix it?" Ben asked, his voice small but hopeful. Jason nodded, already mentally cataloging what he would need. "Not just fix it, buddy. I'm going to make it better." He worked methodically, fabricating a replacement part from an old bicycle frame he'd been saving for his own project. His hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the alignment with specialized tools he'd modified himself years ago. As daylight faded to evening, Jason installed LED lights along the frame, a small addition that would make the chair more visible at night. "Is that really necessary?" Olivia asked, checking the time on her phone repeatedly. Jason tightened the last bolt with careful precision. "This isn't just about fixing a wheelchair," he explained, adjusting the tension on the newly installed brake system. "It's about giving him the freedom to move again, safely." He'd seen too many accidents in this town to cut corners, especially with a child's mobility at stake. When he finally rolled the wheelchair back out 3 hours later, Ben gasped. Jason hadn't just repaired it. He had transformed it. The wheels were reinforced with a stronger alloy, the brakes functioned perfectly, and he'd adjusted the seat height and angle for better posture and comfort. Ben hesitated for a moment before gripping the wheels and pushing himself forward. His face lit up with pure joy as he moved effortlessly across the pavement, executing a tight turn that would have been impossible before. "It works. It's better than before," he exclaimed, testing the improved brakes with childlike delight. Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she reached for Jason's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us. His independence is everything." Jason only smiled, the warmth of doing right filling his chest more completely than any payment could. "That's what mechanics do. We fix things." As they left, Ben maneuvering his chair with newfound confidence, Jason exhaled deeply. He was exhausted, but satisfied. He'd done the right thing, even if it had cost him a day's work and parts he couldn't really spare. He had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness, This moment of choosing humanity over profit had set something extraordinary in motion. 2 days later, just as Jason was locking up for the night, a deep rumbling sound filled the air. It was unlike anything he'd heard before, powerful, insistent, and completely out of place in this quiet corner of town. He stepped outside, squinting into the darkening sky, his heart suddenly racing with inexplicable anticipation. Then he saw it, a sleek private jet, gleaming under the evening sun, descending toward the small airstrip just beyond the town's outskirts. In 15 years, he'd never seen anything like it land there. The jet's wheels touched down smoothly, sending up a cloud of dust that caught the last golden rays of sunlight. Jason stood frozen as a sleek black car pulled up alongside the landed aircraft. Something told him that whatever was about to happen next would change everything. Jason stood transfixed as the private jet came to a smooth stop on the small airstrip. The aircraft seemed impossibly out of place, like finding a diamond in a coal mine. This strip had never seen anything more luxurious than crop dusters and the occasional emergency medical flight. The sleek black car that had pulled alongside it waited with its engine humming softly, tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. His calloused fingers absently traced the outline of the wrench in his pocket, a nervous habit developed over years of facing mechanical problems he wasn't sure he could solve. But this wasn't a mechanical problem. This was something else entirely. The jet door opened with hydraulic precision, and a set of stairs unfolded smoothly. A sharply dressed man in his 40s emerged first, his tailored suit without a single wrinkle despite the journey. He adjusted his burgundy tie as he scanned the surroundings, his posture suggesting military training beneath the corporate veneer. His gaze passed over Jason, paused, then returned with focused interest. The man turned slightly and motioned toward the jet. A second figure appeared, older, with silver hair that caught the fading sunlight. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to the world adjusting to his timeline, not the other way around. His suit was simpler but unmistakably expensive, the kind of quality that didn't need to announce itself. Jason was about to retreat into his garage when the older man locked eyes with him across the distance. Something in that gaze, sharp, assessing, but not unkind, rooted him to the spot. The silver-haired man spoke briefly to his companion, who immediately nodded and walked toward the black car. Within seconds, the vehicle's engine deepened in tone and it started moving, straight toward Jason's garage. "What the hell?" Jason muttered, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wiped his hands instinctively on his overalls, suddenly aware of the grease stains, the torn pocket, the years of wear visible in every thread. He stood straighter, a reflex from childhood when facing authority. The car pulled up with silent precision. The first man stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks, platinum, Jason noticed, with small blue stones that matched his tie clip. Everything about him spoke of attention to detail. "Jason Carter?" The man's voice was smooth, cultured, but not condescending. Jason hesitated, suddenly feeling like he was 16 again, caught working on the principal's car without permission. "Yeah, that's me." The man offered a small, professional smile. "My name is Daniel Grayson. I represent Mr. William Hawthorne." He gestured toward the older man, who was now exiting the vehicle with deliberate movements. "May we have a word?" Jason glanced around, half expecting cameras to appear, revealing this as an elaborate prank. But there was only the evening breeze, the distant sound of the jet's engines cooling, and these two powerful men standing before his humble garage. "Sure," Jason said, clearing his throat. "What can I do for you?" William Hawthorne stepped forward, his piercing blue eyes studying Jason with the intensity of someone who missed nothing. Crow's feet at the corners suggested he smiled often, though his expression now remained measured. 2 days ago, Hawthorne began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone rarely interrupted. "You repaired a wheelchair for a young boy. You refused payment and worked late into the night to make sure it wasn't merely fixed, but improved." Jason's stomach tightened. The memory was fresh, Ben's smile, Olivia's gratitude, but he couldn't fathom how this man knew about it, or why he would care. Yeah, he said cautiously. I did. A small smile touched Hawthorne's lips, softening his features. That boy's my grandson. The pieces suddenly clicked together. The well-dressed men, the private jet, the black car. Jason had unknowingly helped someone connected to wealth and influence he could scarcely imagine. His mind raced back to Olivia, her worn coat, and careful spending. Nothing about her had suggested this kind of family connection. Hawthorne continued, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. My daughter told me everything. About how you refused payment, how you used your own resources, how you spent hours making sure his wheelchair wasn't just fixed, but better than before. Jason shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious under the man's intense gaze. It was just a wheelchair. He needed it. I couldn't just let him struggle. Something flickered in Hawthorne's eyes. Respect, gratitude, perhaps something deeper. It wasn't just a wheelchair, Jason. It was his independence, his dignity, his ability to navigate the world on his own terms. He paused, letting the words settle. And you gave that back to him. The evening air felt charged, as if the moment carried more weight than Jason could comprehend. He had fixed countless things in his life. Engines, transmissions, broken axles. But this was the first time anyone had described his work as something transformative. My daughter left her husband 3 years ago, Hawthorne continued, surprising Jason with this personal revelation. She chose to make her own way, without my financial support. It was important to her that Ben understand the value of hard work, of community. His expression softened further. But that doesn't mean I don't watch over them from a distance. Jason nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Olivia's independence wasn't so different from what he'd tried to give Ben. The freedom to move through the world on one's own terms. Hawthorne studied him for a moment longer before speaking again. I don't believe in debts, Jason. I believe in recognizing exceptional people when I find them. He glanced at Daniel, who nodded and produced a sleek black envelope from his coat. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Jason had never had reason to touch before. I have an offer for you, Hawthorne said simply. Jason stared at the envelope, suddenly aware of his oil-stained hands, the dirt under his fingernails despite his best efforts to stay clean. His heart hammered as Daniel extended the envelope toward him. What kind of offer? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Hawthorne's eyes held his, unwavering. The kind that will change your life. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Jason had never considered his life something that could change dramatically. It had always been a straight line, fixing things, getting by, finding small satisfactions in jobs well done. The idea that it could suddenly bend in a new direction was both thrilling and terrifying. With a deep breath, he reached for the envelope, accepting whatever came next. Jason stared at the envelope in Daniel's hand, his fingers trembling slightly as he took it. The paper felt substantial, expensive, nothing like the thin bills and past-due notices he was accustomed to handling. He carefully broke the wax seal and extracted a single sheet of cream-colored paper, the letterhead embossed with a simple H in silver. His eyes scanned the words, but his brain initially refused to process them. The numbers at the bottom of the page seemed to float, disconnected from reality. He blinked hard, shook his head slightly, and forced himself to read again. This can't be real, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant hum of the jet's idling engines. Hawthorne's expression remained calm, but his eyes held a glimmer of understanding. It's very real, Jason. The proposal wasn't simply a job offer. It was an invitation to step into another world. Hawthorne Industries wanted him to lead their adaptive mobility division, overseeing the design and development of cutting-edge mobility equipment for people with disabilities. The salary alone was more than Jason would earn in 10 years at his garage, and that didn't include the benefits package, relocation assistance, or the research budget outlined on the second page. You want to hire me? Jason swallowed, struggling to form coherent thoughts. I don't have a degree. I never even finished engineering school. I'm not hiring your credentials, Hawthorne replied. I'm hiring you. Your ingenuity. Your hands. Your heart. He gestured toward the garage with its outdated equipment and oil-stained floors. What you did for my grandson with these limited resources was remarkable. Imagine what you could accomplish with a state-of-the-art facility and a team of engineers at your disposal. Jason's mind raced. He thought of the countless nights he'd spent tinkering with broken machines, finding unconventional solutions when parts weren't available or affordable. He'd always seen those moments as necessary adaptations, not innovations worth building a career around. Why me? The question escaped before he could stop it. Hawthorne's expression softened. Because people like you are rare, Jason. You didn't help my grandson for money or recognition. You did it because it was the right thing to do. He paused, his gaze steady. That kind of integrity, that kind of innate understanding of what matters, it's worth more than any degree or resume. The weight of the opportunity pressed on Jason's chest. This wasn't just about a better job or more money. It was about leaving everything he knew, his garage, his town, the simplicity of his current life. Could he step into a world of corporate meetings and research teams? Would his practical knowledge translate to that environment? Take your time, Hawthorne said, seeming to sense his hesitation. Think it over. But know this, if you say yes, you will never have to struggle again. More importantly, you'll have the resources to truly change lives, just like you did for my grandson. Jason exhaled slowly, folding the contract carefully and sliding it back into the envelope. I need some time. Of course, Hawthorne nodded. But I will need an answer soon. As the two men returned to their vehicle, Jason stood motionless, the envelope heavy in his hands. The black car pulled away smoothly, heading back toward the waiting jet. He watched until they disappeared from view, then turned to look at his garage, the only real home he'd known for 15 years. That night, sleep evaded him. The contract sat on his workbench, the numbers and words swimming in his head every time he closed his eyes. The opportunity was beyond anything he'd ever imagined, but the thought of leaving everything behind, of stepping into a world he knew nothing about, terrified him more than any mechanical challenge he'd ever faced. The next morning, he went through his usual routine, hoping the familiar rhythms would bring clarity. He tightened bolts, checked engine fluids, and tackled a transmission issue on Mrs. Peterson's old truck. But no matter how much he tried to focus, his mind kept drifting back to that envelope and what it represented. Midway through the afternoon, a familiar sound broke through his thoughts, the soft hum of an electric motor. Jason turned to see Ben maneuvering toward him, his repaired wheelchair moving with newfound precision. Olivia followed, her expression brighter than when he'd first met her. "It's perfect," Ben announced, executing a tight spin to demonstrate. "I can go everywhere now, even the gravel path behind our house." Jason knelt beside him, checking the wheels and making sure everything was still functioning correctly. "That's what I like to hear. No issues at all." Ben shook his head, his smile wide. "None. You're the best mechanic ever." The simple praise warmed Jason's heart, but when he glanced up at Olivia, her expression had turned serious. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I heard about the offer," she said quietly. Jason tensed. News traveled fast in a small town, but he hadn't expected this conversation so soon. "Yeah, I'm still thinking it over." Olivia studied him for a moment, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "My father, he can be overwhelming. He sees potential in people and moves quickly to secure it." She smiled slightly. "It's how he built his company." "Your father," Jason repeated, still adjusting to the connection. "You never mentioned that I come from money." Olivia finished for him. "I left that world behind when I left my husband. I wanted Ben to understand the value of things, not just their price." She glanced at her son, who was demonstrating his wheelchair's turning radius to an elderly customer who had just entered the garage. "But this opportunity," she continued, turning back to Jason, "it's not just about money. Do you realize what it could mean? There are kids like Ben everywhere, struggling with mobility, needing someone with your skills and perspective." Jason had never thought about it that way. Fixing Ben's wheelchair had been a simple act of kindness, but what if he could do that on a larger scale? What if he could help design equipment that made life better for thousands of people? "I know you love this garage," Olivia said softly. "I know it's your life. But sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing yourself to grow beyond what you've always known. Before Jason could respond, Ben rolled back to them and reached for his hand. The boy's small fingers squeezed with surprising strength. "If you go, will you still fix my chair if it ever breaks again?" he asked, his eyes serious. Jason felt his throat tighten. He nodded. "Of course, buddy. Always." Ben considered this, then nodded decisively. "Then I think you should go. You can make chairs for other kids, too." The simple logic of a child sometimes cut through confusion better than any adult reasoning. Jason exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision pressing harder than ever. He had been searching for an answer, and maybe, just maybe, it had found him. Later that afternoon, as Jason stood alone in his garage, the contract still unopened on his workbench, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke through his thoughts. Tires crunched on gravel, and he turned to see the same black car from before. Daniel stepped out, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Mr. Hawthorne thought you might have questions," he said, extending his hand. Jason shook it firmly. "I have a lot of them, actually. Take a ride with me," Daniel suggested. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity won out over hesitation. Jason climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove in comfortable silence out of town. After 20 minutes, they turned onto a long driveway leading to a modern building with glass walls and a sleek design. "What is this place?" Jason asked as they parked. "This," Daniel replied, "is where you'd be working." Inside, Jason's breath caught in his throat. The facility was unlike anything he'd imagined. A vast, open space filled with engineers and technicians working on various mobility devices. In one corner, a team tested a lightweight wheelchair that seemed to navigate stairs effortlessly. In another, someone adjusted what appeared to be an advanced prosthetic limb. "This is what we do," Daniel explained, leading him through the space. "And this is why we need someone like you. Someone who doesn't just see the mechanics of a device, but understands the person using it." As they walked, several employees nodded respectfully to Daniel. One young engineer approached, her eyes lighting up when Daniel introduced Jason. "You're the mechanic Mr. Hawthorne mentioned?" she asked eagerly. "The one who modified the pediatric wheelchair with the custom brake system?" Jason blinked in surprise. "Word travels fast." She smiled. "We've been trying to solve that exact issue with our junior model for months. I'd love to hear how you approached it." For the next hour, Jason found himself engaged in technical conversations that challenged and excited him. These people spoke his language, the language of mechanics, materials, and problem solving, but with resources and possibilities he'd never considered. As they prepared to leave, Jason paused by a workstation where a technician was adjusting a mobility device for a young woman who sat nearby. The woman's face lit up as she tested the controls, her movement suddenly fluid and natural. "That's why we do this," Daniel said quietly, following Jason's gaze. "Every device means freedom for someone." The words echoed in Jason's mind as they drove back to his garage. He thought about Ben, about the joy on his face when he realized he could move independently again. He thought about all the other Bens out there, waiting for someone to understand what they needed. By the time they reached the garage, the decision that had seemed so impossible that morning now felt inevitable. Jason turned to Daniel, his heart pounding, but his mind clear. "What happens if I say yes?" Daniel smiled. "Then your life changes forever." Jason exhaled, staring at his garage, the place that had defined him for so long. And for the first time since receiving the offer, he knew exactly what he had to do. 3 weeks later, Jason stood at the entrance of Hawthorne Industries' Adaptive Mobility Division, his new employee badge clipped to a shirt that still felt strangely formal against his skin. The decision had been made, the papers signed, his small apartment packed up. His garage, the place he'd poured 15 years of his life into, had been sold to Miguel, his occasional helper who'd always dreamed of having his own shop. The transition had happened with dizzying speed. One moment he was Jason Carter, small-town mechanic. The next, he was director of practical design at a facility that cost more than he would have earned in several lifetimes. "Still getting used to it?" asked Sarah, the young engineer he'd met during his first tour. She'd quickly become his guide to navigating both the technical systems and the corporate culture of Hawthorne Industries. It feels like wearing someone else's shoes, Jason admitted, watching as teams of engineers and technicians worked with quiet focus across the vast open space. Expensive, perfectly fitted shoes that somehow don't quite feel like mine yet. Sarah smiled. Give it time. We brought you here because of who you are, not who we want you to become. That simple reassurance had been his anchor through the whirlwind of change. Hawthorne hadn't wanted to transform him into a corporate executive. They wanted his hands, his mind, his way of seeing problems and finding unconventional solutions. Jason had spent his first weeks absorbing everything, learning about materials he'd never worked with, technologies he'd only read about, and most importantly, the people whose lives depended on the devices they created. Each morning brought new challenges. Each evening left him exhausted, but fulfilled in ways his garage never had. Today marked his first major project implementation, a redesigned pediatric wheelchair inspired by his work on Ben's chair, but enhanced with the resources and technology Hawthorne could provide. The prototype sat in the testing area, its sleek frame looking nothing like the cobbled-together repair he'd made in his garage, yet embodying the same principles. The weight distribution is revolutionary, Sarah explained to a visiting doctor as Jason approached. It allows for better maneuverability while maintaining stability. And the adjustable growth system means children won't need replacement chairs as frequently. Jason listened with a mixture of pride and humility. The design had been collaborative, with engineers contributing advanced materials knowledge, while Jason insisted on practical elements. Easily replaceable parts, intuitive maintenance, durability for real-world conditions beyond controlled environments. And the brake system? The doctor asked, examining the chair's construction. That was all Jason, Sarah said, nodding toward him. He designed it based on his experience with children who struggle with fine motor control. It requires minimal hand strength, but won't engage accidentally. The doctor nodded approvingly, and Jason felt a surge of satisfaction. This was why he'd said yes, not for the salary or the prestige, but for the chance to make a tangible difference in people's lives on a scale he could never have achieved alone in his garage. As the day progressed, Jason found himself in the fabrication area, hands covered in graphite dust as he adjusted a prototype fitting. Despite his title and the team at his disposal, he still preferred to work directly with materials when possible. Some problems could only be understood through touch. Mr. Carter? A voice interrupted his concentration. He looked up to see Daniel Grayson, still impeccably dressed, standing with two visitors. We have some special guests who wanted to see the new pediatric model, Daniel explained. Jason wiped his hands quickly on a cloth, then froze as he recognized the visitors, Olivia and Ben. The boy's eyes widened with excitement when he spotted Jason. You really are here, Ben exclaimed, maneuvering his wheelchair forward with practiced ease. Mom said you were making super chairs now. Jason laughed, kneeling to Ben's level. Something like that. How's your chair holding up? It's good, Ben replied, but Mom says I might get to try one of your new ones. Jason glanced at Olivia, who nodded with a smile. That's actually why we're here, she explained. Dad thought Ben would be the perfect test subject for your first production model. The realization hit Jason with unexpected force. His work had come full circle. The boy who had sparked this journey would now benefit from where it had led. Would you like to see it? He asked Ben, whose enthusiastic nod was answer enough. As they moved toward the testing area, Olivia fell in a step beside Jason. How are you adjusting? She asked quietly. It's different, he admitted. Good different, but still strange sometimes. She nodded understanding. I grew up in this world before I left it. It takes time to find your footing. They reached the prototype, and Ben's eyes widened as Jason explained the features. The lightweight frame, the responsive controls, the adjustable elements that would grow with him. Can I try it? Ben asked, barely containing his excitement. With careful movements, Jason helped transfer Ben into the new chair, making small adjustments to fit his proportions. The moment Ben took control, his face transformed with pure joy. The chair responded to his slightest touch, moving with a fluidity his modified wheelchair couldn't match. It's like I'm not even trying. Ben exclaimed, executing a perfect turn that would have been challenging before. It just goes where I think. Jason watched, his throat tight with emotion, as Ben navigated around the testing area with newfound freedom. This moment of pure joy, of barriers falling away. This was what all the change had been for. Later, as Ben continued testing the chair under Sarah's supervision, Olivia pulled Jason aside. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her purse and extracting an envelope. Unlike Hawthorne's formal offer, this envelope was made of construction paper, decorated with colorful markers and stickers. Ben insisted on making it himself, she explained. Jason opened it carefully, finding a handwritten letter inside. The childish scrawl was determined and sincere. "Dear Mr. Jason, thank you for fixing my old wheelchair, but more than that, thank you for believing in me. You didn't just fix something, you changed my life. Now you're going to change lots of lives. I'm proud to be your first project. Your friend forever, Ben." Jason closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the simple words and their profound truth. When he opened them, he saw William Hawthorne had joined them, watching Ben with unmistakable pride. "He's quite the test driver," Hawthorne observed, his usual formality softened by genuine emotion. "He inspired the whole design," Jason replied honestly. Hawthorne turned to him, his expression serious yet warm. "How are you finding your new position, Jason? Is it what you expected?" Jason considered the question, watching as Ben demonstrated the chair's capabilities to a group of impressed engineers. "No," he answered truthfully. "It's more. I thought I was leaving something behind when I closed my garage, but I was actually bringing the best parts with me." Hawthorne nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "That's precisely why I wanted you here. Your garage wasn't just a place, it was a philosophy. Fix what's broken. Improve what works. Care about the person, not just the machine." As the day drew to a close, Jason walked Ben and Olivia to their car, the new wheelchair securely loaded in the trunk for continued home testing. "Will you come visit?" Ben asked, his expression suddenly serious. "To make sure it keeps working, right?" Jason smiled, ruffling the boy's hair gently. "Count on it, buddy." After they drove away, Jason stood in the parking lot, watching the sunset paint the sleek building in golden light. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a struggling mechanic with a stack of unpaid bills and a garage that was slowly failing. Now he led a team developing technology that would change lives across the world. The next morning, as Jason entered the facility, he was greeted by a surprise. The entire team had gathered, and on his workstation sat a custom toolbox, handcrafted wood with his name engraved on a brass plate. "We thought you might miss your old tools," Sarah explained as he examined it with amazement. "So we had this made for you." Inside were his most treasured tools from the garage, the worn wrench his father had given him, the custom pliers he'd modified himself, the precision screwdrivers he'd used on countless delicate repairs, all nestled alongside the advanced instruments his new position required. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. This wasn't about leaving his old life behind. It was about bringing its essence forward into something greater. As the team dispersed to begin the day's work, Jason opened Ben's letter again, reading the final lines that had stayed with him through the night. "You didn't just fix something, you changed my life." He carefully placed the letter in his new toolbox, a reminder of why he was here. Then he rolled up his sleeves, ready to begin. There were lives to change, problems to solve, and a world of possibility waiting for his hands to shape it. Sometimes the greatest repairs weren't to machines at all, but to the paths our lives could take, if only we had the courage to follow them.